live, but we are recording now. Hello,
Hooray.
Instagram.
Hello. We are sharing once Arthur puts it up on Facebook.
Next. Oh, we should probably make like a 2-on-1 Facebook page.
Sarah Almanza is helping me build my website, and she was like, 2-on-1 needs its own Facebook page. I was like, I know. We're up.
Well, I'm just glad that I'm not the one on the bottom. That because that would really make me feel like I was,
It's Arthur's feed because you're on the bottom for me. So.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I'm next to Arthur for.
Yeah, you are.
As I see the screen. So.
I love it. Yeah, so for all of those, I know that we are recording, so this will go, this full thing will go live on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. So, and you can follow us at 2-on-1 Project at all of those handles. So, I want to make sure that we are on Facebook Live before we start real introductions, just as we are waiting.
It is setting up our meeting for Facebook Live. Oh my goodness.
Oh my goodness.
Are we there? I think.
I'm going to just look. This is the part of our 2-on-1 that's real sloppy, and I love it.
We are live. And we
it's called Authentic and Real.
True. There it is. And I see us, so I can see anybody watching if anyone has any questions. So welcome to 2-on-1. It's a very special 2-on-1 for lots of reasons. One, I have been wanting to talk about this topic for a really long time. Today, we are talking about the United States women's national soccer team. You may know them as the badass women of last summer's FIFA World Cup. They are the 4-star champions. And someone who is just beloved to me for many reasons, and we will get into later, the one this week is Reverend Shanna Steitz, who is also a soccer person, a soccer mom, a soccer fan.
But never a soccer player.
But never. You were a basketball player, if I recall.
Yes. Basketball was one of the many sports I attempted to play once upon a time.
Excellent.
But never soccer. We never had soccer in rural Missouri.
Yeah.
Wait, what part of Missouri are you from?
Oh, Lord. Well, I mostly grew up in Amity. So.
Amity. Is that west side or east side?
That is between St. Joe and Cameron. It is a wide spot in the road. So.
Keep going there.
No, it's okay. I was born and raised in St. Louis, and I'm always excited.
Wrong side. Y'all call soda different things.
We call it soda. No, that is incorrect. And the soda pop line is in southern Iowa. Or no, it's in Hannibal. The north-south divide. I'm sorry, Spiff.
Anyway, we have totally
fine. I always say all roads lead to Macon in my ministry because so many of my people are from, you got Mark, Seth, you, Allison, like there's just all roads lead to Macon and I've never been, so one day. Well, there it is. You know what? So Shanna, why don't you take a minute, introduce yourself, talk to you a little bit about soccer. I know that I threw, those of you that saw on Instagram yesterday, I threw up a couple of questions at Shanna, but I'd love for you just to introduce yourself, say what you're doing, say a little bit about what's happening at Community right now, because I think that that's the work that you're doing there is incredible. And as we recognize our privilege of the three of us as white people on this conversation, we are also very cognizant and aware of all the things that are happening in our world. So, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm Shanna Steitz. I am one of the clergy staff here at Community Christian Church on the Country Club Plaza in Kansas City, Missouri. I have just finished my 5th year, and this was to be my 2nd week of sabbatical. Sabbatical was postponed earlier in the spring with COVID, and because the universe did not want me to have this sabbatical, I was to be in a beach house in the Gulf. We received a Lilly grant for the sabbatical, and so we were really honored to have that. And so this was to be a beach week in the Gulf with my husband and my kids, not far from where the tropical depression made landfall. And so we couldn't have got there anyway. And so it was like one more thing that said the universe has something else planned for sabbatical. So we've been here 5 years. And before that, we were at First Congregational Church of Los Angeles, which is how we came to encounter Stephanie, or she encountered us. I'm not sure which.
I am an encountered experience.
Yes. And so yeah. What's been happening here? Well, we have a historic Frank Lloyd Wright designed building. So why does that matter? It matters because it's a great big concrete block of a building. And across the street on Main Street is Mill Creek Park with the J.C. Nichols Fountain. The J.C. Nichols Fountain is a topic of conversation actually today all over Kansas City media because of his development practices of developing neighborhoods earlier in our history of Kansas City, of developing neighborhoods that were strictly restricted to white families. So as is everything else of naming of things, that's a conversation. Well, it's been a conversation here in Kansas City for as long as I can remember. So anyway, across Main Street from us is Mill Creek Park, where protests happen all the time. I mean, there are always gatherings and marches and stuff. It always happens across the street. And not always, but often, many. So it was the centerpiece of the location for many protests over the last 2 weeks. And a week ago Sunday, 10 days ago now, I guess, the days kind of all run together for me at this point. It literally exploded in our front yard. I had been here all day on Sunday. We had some limited damage on Saturday night. But then on Sunday, it just sort of exploded. And all of that unfolded on our front lawn, literally on our front lawn. I was at home because I had promised Congressman Emanuel Cleaver, who is our congressman, former mayor, and United Methodist pastor, I had promised him that I would not be here after dark. He made me promise that. And so I was not. And so I watched from my couch as the tear gas covered our building. We had some reporters on our balcony that overlooks the park. And she was live. One of the reporters was live on the air when the gas went off. And she was out on our balcony and she went back in. One of her colleagues tweeted out the next day, who was also here, that literally Community Christian Church provided the literal meaning of sanctuary to them the night before. So Monday then led to much of our neighborhood looking very different. Glass broken, graffiti everywhere. I picked up 2 tear gas canisters out of our front yard. Someone asked me about the tear gas canisters because I used it in several different social media posts. And so I tried to be really clear that the tear gas canister wasn't necessarily a statement about the tear gassing itself. What it was a statement is that we say every Sunday that Community Christian Church is a place where people of all ages, all abilities, and all identities can be known as God's beloved, and that all means all. And so we try to be a safe place for everybody. And on Sunday, as I have reflected on it, it seemed to me that nobody was safe. Nobody felt safe, at least, on our little corner of the world here at 46th and Main. Nobody felt safe. And so it was just a really unusual, how many times do you pick up a tear gas canister? I had never picked one up before. I took it home and showed it to the kids, and it's sort of one of those prayer totems now. So all of that has been happening. We left some of the graffiti up just sort of as a statement. It was a theological statement for us, for our clergy staff, or at least for me. I don't want to speak for my colleagues, but they're usually pretty good at telling me if I'm off base. So I trust them in that, and we have a pretty good I think, relationship in that. But we took down things like die pigs because I just couldn't quite deal with that. But some of the other we left up, and one of the things that I said was, you know, our building was the physical manifestation of God in the midst of the chaos. And I believe that God can hold anything that we throw at her, that she will hold that. She holds us in that. And so the language that's on the building, I feel like the building is giving some voice to people who felt voiceless. It's holding the feelings, the emotion, the rage of our Black siblings. It has made some white folks who have called, it has made them uncomfortable, which, you know, right. But then it became a whole property issue because of our funky building. There's some sort of rare unicorn paint on the side of that our building is painted with. And so actually the graffiti removal chemicals actually were melting the paint. And so anyway, it's been a lot around that. But this week we tried to turn the narrative. We tried to change the story a little bit. And so we partnered with one of the, what I think is one of the best muralists in town. His dad and brother are members here. He actually did the mural in our children's space a couple years ago. Phil Schaefer, better known to the city as Psych Style. I reached out to him. We had to board up a couple of windows, and so I hated the plywood. So we reached out for lots of reasons. We reached out to Phil, and he came yesterday and did some work on those. He printed wheat paste murals, I think is what it's called. I should have checked that. But anyway, it's super cool. They're basically big posters that he has put up on the plywood. I heard a muralist here in town over in KCK yesterday say that sometimes art speaks into spaces where words don't seem sufficient. I mean, I'm paraphrasing something like that she said. And so that's what it does. And I think it changes it to have a different conversation for folks in a more positive way. It's still pushing the envelope for people, but we've been more intentional trying to be about changing the narrative. Wow, I just vomited out the last week of what we've done here, but yeah.
This is churches being church, as opposed to churches being cloistered or churches being in shells, or you guys are doing church as a verb instead of a concept, and that's great.
Well, we're trying.
I'm just gonna.
Right, we're totally making it up as we go along. We really don't have any idea what the hell we're doing.
I have so many opinions about the improvisational nature of active and useful ministry, and maybe that will be the 2-on-1 I try to figure out while Spiff is on vacation. I don't know. I don't need to go into that.
Improv as a 2-on-1 is cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, thank you for sharing all that, because as I've been following along and you and I have been talking, I'm so grateful for your witness and faithfulness to centering Black lives in the Black Lives narrative, not only just in your ministry and the way you preach and lead, but in your physical building. And I think that that's really important as we don't get tied into the idolatry of things and what it means to love expansively instead of loving the kind of the minutia of it in a kind of more tangible and literal way.
And I will say, I'm glad you chose not to put a scripture citation of the Gerasene demoniac under die pigs, which immediately is where my brain went. Just spray paint Mark 5 underneath it and be like, it's biblical, and cause way more controversy.
Well, one of the other things that we took down were the F-bombs. Partially because then on Monday morning, I was doing an interview with one of the local media stations, not scripted, but the guy figured out who I was, and he was like, hey, we're going to be live on the air in 60 seconds. Can you go live with me? And I'm like, I don't think so. And he goes, yeah, now we're live in 45 seconds and I need a person. And I think you're it. And I'm standing here holding my tear gas canister, you know. And so I'm standing there and I said, but I need the building. I need our building, you know, in the background. And the videographer, photojournalist said, he said, yeah, that's great, Reverend Shanna, but you can't stand there because we can't put an F-bomb on live television. So, so we had to shift and shuffle. So anyway.
It's amazing the things that we will censor though, right? So, and what
well, as I said to someone, I mean, I'm mindful of language, but also mindful that, you know, I think I forget who tells the story, but, you know, some old preacher tells the story about saying shit in the pulpit, right? And then yes. You know, that people were more concerned that he said shit in the pulpit than the context of the story he was telling, right? And so.
And I tell my people all the time, those words are holy words. So curse words for me have always been holy words. So.
Yeah.
The Reverend Eric Folkerth did a really good post about that, and he borrowed Campolo's trope, and I might post that on the 2-on-1 page that doesn't exist. Never mind. Okay, soccer.
It'll be there. Soccer. So I guess let's go into my first question, and obviously it's a conversation, so whatever questions come out. But I've been thinking a lot as we named today. You know, today's my birthday. And
happy birthday, Spiff.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. And you know, what do we leave behind? I do a lot of work with Jacques Derrida. There's the trace. There are the things that we are connected to. There's the things that are of us long after we go. And Shanna, you and I have had these conversations along with, you know, shout out to Allison Bright, that there's, you know, we have this kind of line of succession of us, right? There's this family tree, as we call it. And as I've noticed, so I have been a soccer fan my entire life. I played for 18 years. It has been a part of me. I remember watching the 91 first World Cup soccer thinking oh my goodness, here it is. Like the fact that I'm old enough to remember the first female or women's World Cup is beyond me, but that's a whole other thing. But I want to talk about legacy and what scripture has to tell us about legacy, how we see legacy at play in our world, how, you know, in soccer, there's a lot of talk about legacy, right? We go from like Akers to Ham to Wambach to Pinot, right. And especially in the what are, you know, the big 4 years, which are 91, 99, 2015, 2019. And those are the years that we won the FIFA World Cup. So I'm wondering what your understanding of the role of legacy is.
Wow, you didn't prep me with that one.
Sorry.
Yeah.
It came to me in the shower as I was getting dressed, as I'm talking to someone who literally, as people should know, and I have named you and your husband Ryan during my time at First Church, very much shepherded my call into not only ministry, but into being someone of faith, and into recognizing God's work in the world as something, rather than as nothing, as I had been naming it before. So, so I'm grateful to be in the legacy and lineage of the Steitz, and also recognize what a gift and a privilege and a responsibility it is to hold name and space with someone.
You know, it's interesting to, I was in a planning meeting a year or so ago for an event around Pride, and I was the only straight person in the room, which didn't bother me. That was okay, you know. What I realized eventually was that I was also the oldest person in the room, and so I was 45 at the time, something like that. To make round numbers, I was 45. And the one person said, you know, oh, Shanna's been, you know, ordained more than 15 years, and somebody else has been ordained 10 years, and somebody, you know, and basically it was like I was the grandmother of the room, and I was like, oh, I was okay being the only straight person, but now that I'm also the token old person, I don't know what to do with that. And so it's been really interesting. for what it means that some of our kids now are becoming our colleagues. I heard my sister Verzola Law say this yesterday in one of her Facebook Lives as she was walking, talking about her kids, camp kids once upon a time who are now colleagues.
Who's watching, by the way? Hey, Verzola.
Oh, hey, sis. She starts her vacation today.
So your vacation, Verzola.
Yeah. So we and to see how, I didn't go to seminary. I went to seminary to get a PhD and to teach at the university level.
Oops.
Right? I know. And then Bright had other, Bright Divinity just kind of turned that on its head. But I realized at one point, because I had gone, when I first went to college, I went to William Jewell, which is now a very different place than it was when I was there more than 25 years ago. And I had to take a Bible class. And the professor taught it as a Bible class, not as Sunday school. And he was very clear about that. And it was like cool for me. I thought, oh, that was really amazing. But it really was hard for a lot of my classmates. And so when I went to seminary, I thought, oh, I'm going to go and I want to go back and I want to be a university professor so I can blow people's mind, like that guy did. And then I realized that if you raise up kiddos from the time that they're little to understand that church is different, then maybe you have less of them at 18 or 19 or 20 years old in a college class that have that experience, So now I think about that of going to seminary 19 years ago, and in the summer of 2001, and moving to Fort Worth, and how that has changed to now we have all these kids. You talk about Allison Bright, who is our seminarian in residence, who we're partnering with towards ordination. Allison was like in the first grade when we first got to Macon. T. Ann Smith Morger, who is now a United States Army chaplain, was a high school kid of ours, and and seeing the work she's doing and all of that. And then my Audrey, who is 13, so we were watching the first edition of this season of Queer Eye on Monday night, right? And I don't know if you've seen it, but it's an ELCA pastor who is gay, and his church council nominates him for.
And I'm sorry, I hate to interrupt. And they redid and painted the church without going through 3 years of committee work, and that is a miracle.
All of us thought was like, oh my God, they came in and no one
nobody threatened.
And they all loved it, right?
And they all loved it. And
the purple sanctuary now, and no one freaked out.
Right. It was so beautiful. But I realized, it's like I'm sitting there watching, and I'm a weepy mess, and my husband is a weepy mess. And here's my Audrey at 13. And I looked at her through tear-filled eyes, and I'm like, sis, this is why our church matters, because they're talking about how, church was such a hurtful place and this and that. And so now, and the boys had the Fab Five had referred themselves as a gaggle of gays, and Audrey says, yeah, we love us a gaggle of gays, Mom, And Audrey's never been a part of she doesn't know a place. She doesn't know church that doesn't love everybody, that doesn't say everybody matters, that everybody can be who they are, and to do that. And while that's also really good, it's also, I'm really mindful that I have to make sure she always knows that there's another side of that.
Sure.
Right. So anyway, so that legacy is just really coming to, of now are my kids being teenagers and the kind of church that they've always known. And now my kids, my church kids who are growing up and watching them, do the things that they're doing. I just try to get out of their way at this point, and say, and give them platforms to do things, and to, I don't know. I don't know if I answered your question. I think I just carried on about shit, but you know.
Right? No, I mean, I think it. So I will never forget when I finally. So two part of my call story. Well, you're a part of a lot of the call story, but especially when I was like, I'm gonna go to seminary, right? And I remember Susan Leary asking if we thought this was a good idea, and you were like, no. And I was like, I now understand what that meant. I took it very internally as like I was not called to be a pastor, and very like, but that was my own shit to work through naturally. But you were like, this church, First Church, is a unicorn church. It's a church like no other church, and it was the only church that I had known.
Right.
And so, I go into Texas with this very naive understanding of church, like just shipped off from ULoves, being like, good luck, have fun.
There's a gin and tonic, off you go.
Exactly. And knowing that like what I was building was a part of a legacy, was a part, I was in line with people that had gone to this institution, had come then and served this beloved community, and you guys had placed me on that path ahead of some of my peers in a way that I was really grateful for. Mm-hmm. And I think that is part of what legacy does, is it socially locates you in a time and place, but also reminds you of your responsibility to move that legacy, right? And I think we start to see that now as the players union, just, you know, with their statement where they let all the Black players actually like speak, and then they brought in Becky and Julie to give a little bit of white perspective. And as both of them, they were asked specifically because Julie's a captain and Becky's the president of the players union, and that, you know, part of the legacy of what this group of women are doing, and some of them have played, you know, like, I don't know if Ham and Pinot ever crossed, but I know that Wambach crossed all you know, a big portion of them, and you see the kind of handoff and the steps forward that legacy provides, and I think that that's important of what is legacy and what is the next portion. Who are we handing off to, when and how?
Well, there has to be the inherent trust of handing it off. And I think with the church dynamic on it, I love this, and I feel like I'm almost interrupting, and I know I'm not, because I'm a co-host. But it's and I could listen to y'all talk all day, and I just may. It is I think about it where there's a student right now at Vanderbilt Divinity School. His name is Josh Jackson. I think you've encountered Josh Spiff, and maybe you have too, Shanna. And so when he was a child, Paul Carpenter, who's now at First Lubbock, was his children's minister. They then moved to Creekwood Christian Church in Flower Mound, where I was his youth minister for most of his call, at which point then Whitney Waller Cole came in. And as he went to TCU, Jamie Plunkett ended up being the person who worked with him when he was like, pedigree is not the right word, but that lineage thing is, I think Josh, whether he wants it or not, has something from each of those. And I think that's a willingly given thing in church communities. When I arrived at Midway Hills in Dallas, the Reverend Bob Gartman, who has since joined the choir Eternal, and I miss him so much, he said, so you grew up in St. Louis? And I said, yeah. And he goes, in Manchester? And I said, yeah. So he said, so you were at Community Christian Church when blah, blah, blah was there? And I said, I wasn't at Community Christian Church. He said, oh, so you went to Webster Groves? And I said, I wasn't a disciple. I didn't tell him that I used to go make out in the parking lot of Community Christian Church because it was relatively hidden. And that's when I learned church happens on Wednesday nights. But it was so he said, well, what were you? And I said, well, when I was in college, I became a Quaker, and I was up in Iowa City. And honest to God, he's like, oh, so were you at the program meeting led by Susan, or were you at the unprogrammed meeting? And I said, Bob, I'm called by God. I'm not called by a long lineage. And he goes, yes, you are.
Yeah.
And that disagreement was, yes. And the Presbyterian minister, Pastor Carol, who helped me hear that call and told me that you don't go to seminary and not become a minister. So that's the only time she ever lied to me. Not that I didn't, but other folk chose not to. I think it's that pouring into it. And I will admit my own ignorance on the soccer side. I didn't do the math on Mia Hamm was in the 90s.
Yeah. 90s through, I think her last game was, and I can look this up, 2005?
2005.
I'm going to look up Mia's.
Well, and it's, for some odd reason, I thought she'd still be playing. And of course she wouldn't, and maybe she would be, but like the Megan Rapinoe thing, I was like, oh yeah, she probably plays with Mia Hamm. And no, but she is directly influenced from that, because I think the sheer brash cockiness, and I'm using that word particularly, of the women's team this year is influenced in part by ripping off your jersey and waving it around wearing a sports bra. Something all three of us have done from the pulpits, respectively, that we work in.
So Mia Hamm, just for our fact check, was on the national team for the United States from 1987 to 2004.
There you go.
Wow.
So she was, so she joined the ranks before FIFA World Cup was even for women, right? Like, she's part of that pioneer team that really said, like, we are professional athletes and need to be named as such, and handed it off, year after year as we went, in the way in which, I'm watching. Nothing is weirder than being Instagram friends with your children, Shanna. And
my children being Instagram friends with my children.
Yeah, like Audie being like, she and I talk soccer, right? And but knowing that part of the legacy isn't necessarily always just those that are named at the top, right? Those that become the ordained ministers and things like that. But like, I don't know if either of your kids feel called into this ministry, and that's, whether or not they do or don't, there's time to figure that out. But I do know that part of ministry in general that is part of this legacy is that they go to a church where they see a woman in the pulpit. They see a woman use female pronouns for God. They see men use female pronouns for God. And they know that our Bible is a book of and for Black and brown people. Like, that it was written, like, historically when it was written, like, it is a cultural book of narratives around Black life. And that is not something that they will be shocked by in a Bible class or shy to share in the legacy of discipleship writ large. And that is where we are handing off now. Arthur?
Well, no, so I have a question on the soccer stuff, but I'm sorry, I'm stepping on your point.
Do it. Ask the soccer question.
Well, so within that, it is so I taught New Testament at Butler Community College in El Dorado, Kansas, which is featured in Last Chance University. I taught for a semester, and it was marvelous, especially because I would get papers that started with 2 Peter was written by the Apostle Peter when, and I would give them back and say, I need you to at least pretend to read the textbook by Bart Ehrman. And it is the...
Pretend. Give it the old college try.
Pretend. Like, just slap in a quote. I don't even care what it's from. Just give me a footnote. I'm not going to check it. But it is... There's that threat that comes from college kids being told, no, Paul didn't write the letter to the Hebrews, let alone there were 3 Pauls, if not 4, and the Paul that you think you know really wouldn't put up with your nonsense, and also had some major misogyny issues. I'm burying the lead. Without that shock, there's something to be said about telling the kids the stories as the stories are, about telling the story of Yael in a children's moment, and not being like, and she told him he was a bad guy, but she drove a tent peg through his head. And I think about it with Megan Rapinoe, where she was, in some interview, and she said, we're not going to the effing White House. And people were like, well, you can't do that if you're a sports star. You can't, well, somebody please think of the children. And I oftentimes thought, yeah, maybe those kids need to be able to say that. Maybe they need to be equipped. But I'm sure there's a question in there. I'm sorry, I was just hearing that, and it.
Well, I mean, I have a question around that, and I think that'll kind of tie, unless Shanna, you want to hop on.
Go ahead.
So what did I? So basically, I want to kind of name, what you call the brassiness of our women.
Cockiness.
The cockiness.
And I will
So, part of that, I mean, as it sits behind me, right, there was so much pushback for Pino's, like, look at me stance, right? And, the president went after her when she said, we're not going to the White House, and said she better show up. And, she did. And I think some of that, like, what does it mean? What is required of us for those seeking justice to enact courage? I would say cockiness is not the right. I think that they are gifted. I think that we allow men to show up in spaces with pride way more than we expect the kind of perverted definition of humility to lead with how we expect women who are exceptional.
And that's exactly why I used cockiness, because if men did what the 2019 USWNT did, it would be a non-issue. There would be no conversation about it. It would just be seen as, forgive it, boys being boys. Okay. I'm using cockiness, of course, pointing to male genitalia, and as I am so predisposed, but that sheer level of, but I appreciate courage and bravery. The Reverend Dr. Irie Session yesterday in a webinar with the Christian Church in the Southwest. And I love Dr. Irie. And if you're watching, hi, I love you. I think you're marvelous.
She had the best quote too, but go ahead. We can come back.
She said, I need white people to be brave. And so like hey, welcome to the Enneagram stuff. If most of us are 6s on the Enneagram, none of us in this room, but like y'all cycle to it, I'm on the wing of it. There's fear. There's fear and there's loyalty. And to be brave is to be loyal to the work of justice and to God's justice. I need to finish with a question, and I never do.
So my question in it is, what is the role of humility and justice, and how has that definition of humility kept women and other people that have found themselves marginalized within communities at bay, right? When we are expected to show humility in the same and the same level of exceptionalism, and if not more so. I will say this also shows up in pay equity. I'm sorry, but I watched that video. I also learned that they did not pay those women, those primarily Black women in that space. And I know that other people in that call, that was work time for them, they're getting paid. Sorry, pay them. Economic justice is justice for all, and it's racial equality and all of that. But that's my side note on, and we'll come back to pay and equity. But but my question is.
The question is here, but I think I have something.
Do it. Exactly.
I have actively seen a spiritual director for a lot of years. And many, many years ago, in a previous spiritual director that I had, female, went to seminary when, there weren't many. And now is, at the time she would say she was filling her Parthenon, and exploring some pagan traditions, ordained disciple, but also exploring some other traditions. Anyway.
As we're wont to do, yeah.
Right. And she said to me, and this has probably been, I don't know, more than a decade ago now, because it was before we lived in LA. So definitely more than a decade ago now. She said, what are you really afraid of? And I'm sitting here, I'm like, I don't know, And finally, I forget if she said it or I said it, but finally we got to the point she says, you're afraid to claim your power. And I have carried that with me.
That's a word.
Right?
Yeah.
You are afraid to claim your power. And as I think about this, and I think about, the mention of Brandy Chastain, and that's why I listed her as my all-time fave, although I thought it was like asking me to choose which of my children I love more.
It was a hard question, I know.
Right. And I think it wasn't, and I don't know if this is real for me or if it's just my middle-aged mother mind thinking about it this way. Brandy just plainly claimed her power. She claimed her power when she ripped off her shirt and she waved it around, and she was like, I am strong and I am here and and here it is.
Yep.
I'm so sorry because I said Mia Hamm and that was incorrect. Excuse
It's
me.
the same team. They were all in that line together. It's all right.
Anyway, it doesn't matter. I probably heard whatever I thought should be correct and didn't even pay attention. But I think about that in relation to this conversation of, she did that and she caught tons of flack for it, right? Mm-hmm. And we put women's bodies with a lot less clothes on than that all over everywhere. So what are we clutching our pearls about, right?
It is the power.
It's like, seriously. You got a swimsuit issue of Sports Illustrated that has nothing to do with, I mean, that's a whole different story. But here is a woman who has this strong athletic body and claiming that for herself. And I think that's what Megan Rapinoe was doing with her thing. She was claiming her power unabashedly as a woman. And that's about legacy too, right? Rapinoe couldn't have done that, I don't think, had Brandi Chastain not stood there in her sports bra, right? It's the same pose, just different, I think. For me, it is.
Oh, that's the line. It's
that's
the same
good.
pose,
Yeah,
just different.
Yeah.
That's good.
But that's legacy, right? I mean, that's what we're talking about me, and my responsibility to someone like Allison Bright. Sorry, Allison, that we're using you and you're not here. But that I see that in the same kind of way, right? And so it's that legacy piece of Brandi claimed her power, and that then fed into to Abby claiming her power, and now Megan claiming her power, and now this next generation claiming their power. And to seeing that for my 13-year-old daughter and for my 16-year-old son, who we went to Kansas City Power and Light and packed in there with a bajillion people, and there's music and all this stuff, and they all showed up for a girls' game. And that reminds my 16-year-old son that, it's cool to show up for a girls' game. And it shows our daughter that people value, and it's also, I think, Brandi ripping off her shirt and all that also began to, and I don't know if this is true or not, but there has been this shift in what it means to be, to have a beautiful female body, right? And it doesn't mean to be 100 pounds dripping wet, not necessarily, right? That strong women, that my 13-year-old came in the other day because, she wants to have this strong body, which also relates then to her strong spirit. And she's like, look at this, Mom, the push-ups are working, and it's that she can claim that for herself in a way that I probably couldn't as a 13-year-old. I probably couldn't as a 23-year-old girl. So
I'm 37 today, and there are days in which I can't claim it. So I mean,
right. But I think those women have helped to change that. When they show up to the ESPYs looking smoking hot, right? I think I can say that as a straight woman. I mean, they showed up smoking hot, and
you're allowed to speak truth as a straight woman. Like, I thought they were smoking hot, and I'm a gay man. So
I think they showed up smoking hot, and some of them showed up smoking hot in a cocktail dress, and some of them showed up smoking hot, but they have these bodies that are strong, and that gets played out in spirit and leadership, and it comes out in role models in ways that I'm not sure I had when I was 13.
I mean, I used, the fact that I first of all, I can name that Ashlyn Harris is my favorite player, my favorite current player right now. And partly it's her style and her confidence, right? I love her so much that, like, when I was like, okay, I've got to show up for General Assembly, and I got to look, like, I was like, I'm going to do a cape. I'm going to do a mohawk. I'm going to rock a bow tie. And I'm going to look feminine. And I'm going to look strong. And I'm going to be comfortable. And all the things that I had just, like, I rode the high of last summer much longer than I probably thought I would. Not should have, because I think that's part of what it is. What?
Follow Spiff on Twitter if you're not. You get a lot of hot takes on the U.S. women's soccer team.
My Twitter is strictly like, it's like random thoughts on Black Lives Matter. Not random. They're articulated and thoughtful, listened to tweets on Black Lives Matter, and then like a lot of me like.
And wishing Chris Evans good night most nights.
Good night, Chris Evans.
I have stopped during these moments because
I saw that. I noticed that.
I feel like it's not the time for me to lift up my love for Chris Evans. But
I have a question. Speaking of strong bodies and role models, last week as we talked to Minister Quadri Harris, which that conversation just kept feeding me through the week. And if you're watching, Quadri, thank you. You're a fantastic guest. I asked a question about I encountered a 5-year-old white boy in Wichita, Kansas, who was dressed as the Black Panther. And I remember that gave me like this cognitive like dissonance. And we kind of talked about this. One of the things that happened this year is people were tweeting to Alex Morgan and to Megan Rapinoe specifically, boys, we're dressing up as members of the U.S. women's national soccer team. There's a great picture of, I looked it up, the tweet. He's an 11-year-old Midwestern and he's doing that. And he's got the pink hair and he's got the uniform and Rapinoe on his jersey. And I guess the question is then this, again, what does it mean for people who do not belong in that category generally to participate in this with role models with these images?
Mm.
Is it okay for boys to dress up as Megan Rapinoe?
Sure.
I think yes. And I will name it in the conversation last week. I took the opposing. I don't think it's appropriate for white children to dress up as Black Panther because there is not enough distance between generational understanding. Like Black kids these days have not had years of Black role models to themselves the way white kids have. So I do think, but I also think allyship, and this is actually one of my questions too, is an invitation, right? And I think what the invitation around specifically like the women's soccer team last year was show up authentically as yourself. And that is, and so for little boys to be showing up as Megan Rapinoe, who identifies as a woman, as a lesbian, but in like the performative nature of life, does something with gender that is unique and invitational. And I think that, and she herself has said, this is okay. Now, this is not the same as, Black community and culture being used by white people. So that.
Because there's not one representative who can make that decision. And this is a tangible, actual human being.
Person who is like all about it. Alex Morgan did the same thing. She named it, I think most of our players lifted that up. Shanna, thoughts?
I don't know, and I don't mean to make this all about my kids, but so much of this for me, because you started with legacy, right? And so now that's where my head is as a mom. But some of it is, when Audrey knows that there are boys like her brother and men like her dad who will show up for women in real ways, then if she so chooses, or if it is who she is to grow up and to whoever her partner is, whatever their gender is, right? Whoever she finds to be her person in life, then she knows, right, that if it is, of a male gender, that there are men in the world who show up for women in these ways, and she'll expect that, right? She'll demand nothing less. And so, and the same for Jake then, Jake knows, now at 16, Jake's pretty clear about, his sexuality and all of that. And claims that for himself and that's fine. But I also then see the girls that he hangs with, and they are these strong, leaders, these girls that will put him in check so fast, so I think there's something to having for boys to know that these strong, and to honor and to look up to these women who are strong, and it's good for everybody. I think it's good for everybody.
Yeah, equity. I mean, actual equity. It's not tokenism. It's not displacement. It's equity. I just want to note, Allison Bright just added me as a friend on Facebook. So there you go. We've invoked her enough, so now we are all mutual friends of hers.
Yay! I love that you speak from a place of motherhood. I am in the process, and I mean, my people know this, so it's okay for me to talk about this. I'm in the process of becoming a foster parent. So that, what does parenting look like? And I'm always like, last year, Cindy LaRue gave birth to her second child. I think Rue's birthday is like the end of June, early July. It was right before the finals. And then, so she also plays for my NWSL team, which is the Orlando Pride. And, and she was back on the field 3 months later. And I think we undervalue the capabilities of women, especially mothers in the space. And I think biblically so much of what we do socially is because of how we are conditioned through our understanding and interpretation of scripture, right? And so the question is, what do these new age of mothers and women have to teach us, and how can we do so faithfully in our communities of our Christian communities?
I lost the question.
Yeah, I did too. Arthur, did you pick up the question?
Can you rephrase that?
Yeah.
I think the question is,
can I get a definition?
An equitable motherhood, how does it influence scripture? How do we faithfully interpret and participate in the Christian walk? As
faith leaders, what does motherhood, specifically modern motherhood, looking at women who are doing it all, like Sydney and Alex Morgan, right? Have to teach us about leadership female leadership in Christian communities.
So Elizabeth Ersick wrote a book called Women, Ritual, and Power, and it's a case study of 4 different communities. It's her church out in San Francisco and the Daughters of Wisdom. And I literally just read it, and I cannot tell you the other 2. A Methodist person who started using female imagery for God and doing womanist or feminist, like counter worship almost. And the Church of Scotland being just the most Scottish thing in the world. It's fascinating to me because this book is relatively new. They talk about using YouTube as like revolutionary, and about, her church had a website, so that's evangel. And I'm like, this was written in 2014. What is happening right now? I imagine the author wearing like a Dole Kemp sweatshirt. I don't know. Anyways, I think that new motherhood idea within the church, what has to be seen, and what stuck with me from this book was the pastor of her church. They said, well, are you going to find balance, and are you going to use male language or male pronouns and titles for God as well? And the response of that pastor was, sure, once all of the churches that use male language stop, I will stop doing only female language. And I've thought about that a lot. A brilliant person I worked with in Texas, as we shifted our worship language, she said, you have to use feminine imagery for God. And I said, oh, well, we're going gender neutral. And she said, that's just as exclusive of women as only using male language. And I'm sorry, I'm answering a question about womanhood in a conversation with 2 women. So let me please explain to you as a man, or mansplain, which is a portmanteau of man and explanation. Sorry, but I just, that kind of haunted me of we'll stop once you stop. But I don't think it answers the question I just rephrased. So
I'm still not sure what the question is, but
here, go.
I keep saying this. I don't know what the question is, but maybe here's a thought.
Mm-hmm.
When I took this job, Same spiritual director who asked me about claiming my power. Same spiritual director asked me to, oh, that was me. Ooh, that was weird.
Sorry.
Asked me about how I might lead differently, how I would lead from a feminine place. She said, you know, I have a master's in athletic business, right? So I ran in that world for many years. That was my world for many years. So that there is no deeper place in the world than college athletics for the old boys club, right? I mean, the church and college athletics for old boys club are pretty anyway.
They don't slip as many $100 bills to pastors as they do to NCAA athletes, though. That's been my experience. It may be different. But I have thought a lot about her question about, as you take a church, even though we're not a large church here at Community, we sort of have that historic whatever, right? And so she said, how will you begin to think about, she says, you can do it the way the boys have always done it. She says, but is that what the church needs in this time? And that was, you know, almost 6 years ago now. And up here, you'll see I have this Madonna up over my shoulder. One of my dearest seminary friends gave that to me at my ordination, because right after I was ordained and we first went to Macon, I stayed home for a while. I had a career in university athletics and fundraising and all of that. And we had just, for lots of personal family, it was what was best for our family, I stayed home. And someone said to me, we don't ordain people to motherhood. And someone who I thought was a mentor, who was a mentor in my life, was incredibly hurtful to me to say that. And after that, this dear beloved straight man gave me this Mary with this beautiful note, you know, about what it means in the ministry of motherhood. And I've thought about that. And I've also thought about the person who was the chair of my ordination committee, who challenged me, you know, with my husband and I at the time were clergy couple. I mean, we are a clergy couple, but we were both serving in the church. Now he does the ministry of middle school teaching, which is a much more difficult than, you know, but about sacrificing my kids on the altar of the church. And she said, be very, you know, be real clear about what's most important. And so while there are some weeks, like last week, I barely saw my little people who are no longer little people. But I mean, I try not to make those weeks the normal, right? Because I want my kids to grow up to actually love the church and to love God and to work for Jesus and do all that stuff, right? So we have to be real clear, as clergy at least, about what that means. And with no disrespect, I think women maybe have a way of doing that, in a way of leading that has, that this particular person who said that to me about don't sacrifice your kids on the altar of the church, knew well a pastoral situation that had sacrificed their family on the altar of the church. And so I was real clear with this congregation when I came. And if I set that example from the front, or I don't know if it's from the top or whatever it is, but as the leader of this, as one of the leaders of this faith community, we're real clear that that my kids and my husband and my family comes first, because I really think that's the model I'm called to lead. And I don't know if that answers your question, but I think having female leadership within the church in official capacities, right, in true leadership,
has a way of bringing in that feminine side that is that we've missed for so long, right? That it's just been heavy-handed, so to speak, on the one side. I mean, you would have thought I had done something really amazing. We did this sermon series called the Stiletto Gospels, like, I don't know, 4 years ago. And now there's this joke, and church people bring me red stiletto staplers and you know, all these different things about the Stiletto Gospels. And again, then you're helping everybody to see this balance of the divinity. In my office on the other side of this wall are two pictures from a gallery show that we had at First Church with our friend Andy Romanoff. And it has these two images of God that are ancient. They're and one is a male image and one is a female image. And it's this goddess. And I have them here in my office. They're framed and they're in separate, you know, to remind, because again, art is about conversation. Art inspires conversation. So people ask about those two to remind us that both of those images matter. And I think that maybe is what you were asking. I don't know how that fits with soccer.
No, this is so good. And I'm sorry, Spiff, and please go ahead. I'm talking.
I just think that how it fits in with soccer is that we are seeing this new age of, you know, we can name now, you know, Jessica McDonald and Alex Morgan and Cindy LaRue, and we can name mothers on the team, whereas we couldn't before. And it's because of a new understanding of modeling, of leadership. And, you know, a soccer team is very much like a congregation, right? You've got a captain, but you all play the same. You're all playing for the same goal, right?
No one really knows how it works. Same idea.
Well, and how much conversation was given? Wasn't it the Prime Minister of New Zealand, right? When she had her baby, am I thinking of the right person?
Yeah, I think so.
Right, and she had her baby, and she's still the president, and you know, people are like, oh, how are you going to, or the prime minister is like, well, how are you going to well, did you ever ask men that question? Mm-hmm. Right. It's like at the beginning of Abby Wambach's book, Wolfpack.
Okay, Wolfpack.
Which is a little book. You can read it in like an afternoon, right? You can read it in like an hour. And she talks about going in to do this inspirational speaking training, you know, teamwork thing for some corporate something. And the man in charge, one of the men in charge asked her, you know, well, will men be able to relate to that? You know, how will men in the room be able to navigate that? And she said, I'm just curious if over the years when you had male, you know, inspirational speakers come, did you ask them that question of how will women be able to understand this or relate to this? And maybe I shouldn't say this, but I'm gonna anyway. Even in progressive churches, even with men on search committees who call women, there are still a whole lot of them who aren't sure what to do when women claim their power. Oh. And it's one thing when maybe they can see us as equals. I mean, I think maybe they can see us, or they can at least say they want to see us as equals. But suddenly when we are in the one-up position, it's like, oh,
we're expected to be humble, right? We're expected to be
grateful. And they're not quite sure. And yeah, and that is why that's one more reason why this was such a threat, right?
So oh, excuse me, I'm sorry. That is a threat because it's claiming the power that's inherent. And forgive me, I cut you off.
No, that's
no. I wanted to talk on the parenting thing because I can see Spiff's gears turning because I know her better since we've started this project and I love it. I need to throw out something on the parenting thing. My husband and I are in the adoption process. And it is super weird doing it in Kansas. And we showed up to our trauma-informed parenting class, and there were 5 couples, and 3 of them were clergy couples. And it was, Arthur's a pastor. And I said, yes. And this is my husband, Brian. And the other two were from evangelical congregations in Kansas. And it was a super weird room. And we were asked the question, who will be the maternal influence on your children? Like, that's some of the paperwork we had to fill out. We also had to fill out fertility-based questions. And I'm like, fertility is not the problem. It's the parts. Like,
you're trying, it's just not sticking.
Like, never mind. But it's, so the maternal based question, I respond and I'm like, Brian's sisters and my sister and our mothers. And Brian replied, he was like, no, there's not a maternal influence because we're both men. And that is a clear, distinctive mark of our family. And that is something that has to be taken into consideration. We have plenty of women in our lives who we trust and we listen to, but they're not the children's mother. And I just, being a white, gay, cisgender man is incredible, because in the LGBTQ movement, we need to just shut up and get out of the way. But there's also these weird intersections with feminism and womanism and everything else. And I hear that. And you want to talk about like the displacement.
Right.
What happens when we say, yeah, we have to march in pride? And I hear you and I see you and I thank you. And
what does even it mean for the maternal side? Right? What does that even mean? And that's an honest question, because I'm not sure.
I think inevitably it just sits at the crux of the threat to the patriarchy, right? Because like to be masculine is to be, is the ideal like thing to be, right? Women can play in the boys' game, and everyone wants to be that. And I think part of the problem with who will be maternal, or who gets to play after they've had babies, who gets to lead, whether their gender identity and sexual expression are different than that of the hegemony, it comes down to the body. I think some of it, right? Some of this is Megan claiming power in her physical bodied self. We can talk about, we can talk all day long on the phone and, not have to look at each other in the eye, and voices may be heard in a more kind of equal and equitable way sometimes. But the minute, I'm on, I show up and I am angry at something or whatever, and then I get asked if I'm on my period, right? Or things like that happen in all sorts of circles. People wondering if Alex Morgan, who, won the silver boot at FIFA last year, and who has been a namesake for a lot of people in women's soccer, is going to be Olympic ready after having Charlie. That was a big thing. And it's because it did something, and it was never coming from women. Women were like,
and
it was always coming from men wondering if their place on top, and they see Alex Morgan as one of the pieces that get us to being on top of women's soccer in the world is threatened.
Their bodies are meant to be controlled by the public narrative, which backs up and supports the patriarchy.
Right. And so it's when we start to claim our bodies. And that's, I think, what Brian is naming as well, like the naming and claiming the male sexual identity of a gay man. Like, these are things you need to name and like say, and they hold weight and value in their own inherent space, as long as the privilege and power that has supported them gets distributed in different ways.
So, cognizant of the time. And
wait a minute, can I just say one thing about my spouse?
Yeah.
Yes. I asked the question about what does it mean to be maternal? Because I think the same question has to be asked of what does it mean to be paternal, right? So what does it mean for me and for many that I can name of clergy sisters who, my husband runs carpool. I mean, he's the one who makes sure people get there. Everybody knows that I don't cook. I mean, I have things that I cook. The children are very clear about what mom cooks. But Ryan is the person who feeds everybody, right? So when my husband spent 11 days in the hospital, our congregation here at Community thought the children would starve to death for fear, because that Shanna wouldn't know how to be. I mean, I can cook. I know how to cook, but we let Ryan do that because that's his spiritual gift, and it's how he loves people, and it's what he does, and it brings him joy and all of that. And so I just asked that question, you know, partially because it's like, when he's the one who is the primary, you know, runner. I mean, he teaches school, he cooks, he does carpool, he navigates all those things, and he has a drink ready for me when I get home, right?
Yeah,
like, so is that just a new understanding of what it means to be paternal, even though that feels maybe like a more maternal? I don't know. I don't even know that the labels are even very helpful anymore. It's just how we have sorted out our life in this time based off of each of our gifts and what's best for our family and our circumstance.
It's why I name Jesus as a woman very often, because so much of the miracles are just this male embodied person doing female things. It's cooking, it's healing, it's the things that it's not that big. It's things that we do on the daily.
Well, so I was asked by a person first, rather boldly.
I didn't mean to run us down a different road here.
I was asked by this person in front of folks, with you and Brian, which one of you is the woman? And I said, well, neither of us. That's why we're called homosexuals. We're both men. And later that person asked Brian and I separately, or me and Brian separately, but it was, which one of you does the woman's work at home? And my response was, neither of us. Any work I do is man's work because I'm a man doing it.
Right, exactly.
And Brian's was, oh, Arthur. So it was kind of funny on that. Actually, it was, which one of you does the man's work, and both of it. Anyways.
Well, and it's like when people ask the question, oh, who's caring? And people don't ask this of us anymore, but it's like, oh, who's caring for your husband is babysitting? No, he's parenting, right?
Yes.
We all parent,
Well,
right? Everybody parents, right?
I always think about The Sandlot, which is a movie I just always think, what's that?
The movie?
The movie, The Sandlot.
Yeah.
Because I used to think the only problematic thing about it was the whole like sexually harassing a lifeguard, presented as boys being boys, but whatever that means. But it's what I realized is the most destructive line in that entire movie is that the deepest, darkest insult possible is to say, you throw like a girl.
Oh, yeah.
And that starts a fist fight and all of this. And it's because it threatens the patriarchy. In the interest of time, and we did warn you about this, we are working on warning our guests. And if you're going to be one of our guests in the future, this is our closing question. I suppose it would be, what character or peoples or place you choose from the Holy Scriptures are best represented in or by the U.S. Women's National Soccer Team?
Right. I struggled with this. The first thing that came to my mind, however, actually was Brandy ripping off her shirt and waving it over her head, and then everybody clutching their pearls. And it made me think about David dancing unabashedly, you know, and the grief he takes of the body. And again, I think these women, starting with Brandy and now into this national team, using body to represent, I guess I'd bring it back to incarnation, right? If we're going to talk theology about it, right? It's about that we are created in the image of God. And in the first 6 days, you know, in the first hot mess of that, you know, every day God says, oh, that's good. Oh, that's good. Oh, that's good. But then when God creates humankind, God says, oh, that's very good. Right. And so it's like, our bodies are good and our bodies are strong. And so often women aren't taught that, you know, that our bodies are good and strong, and, oh, it's that time of the month and we shouldn't talk about that, or, you know, or breastfeeding or whatever it is, you know, it's like, give me a break. And so I don't know, even though it's a male example, it was the first one that came to mind about saying, saying that our bodies are good and our bodies are holy and our bodies are godly, and for women to really claim that, for us to claim that and just say, it was like one time when it was like, I couldn't wear a robe because I hadn't been ordained, and people didn't want me to wear pants on the chancel because women shouldn't wear pants on the chancel, but then my skirt might be too short because I have great legs. And it's like, are you kidding me? So I can't wear pants and I can't wear a dress. Which would you choose? Right. And so, but it was about that my body as a woman on the chancel, right, made people uncomfortable. You don't want me to go there. You don't want me to go there.
Clearly, like that. So you had to be like getting ordained in what, like the 1840s for that regressive of theology, or like what is happening?
Oh, no, that's something that we deal with all the time.
No. And it's like women who were, it's like, I remember there have been women who are, being pregnant, or, I couldn't hear what, and some of it, I don't know. Some people have had different experiences that I have, but,
I mean, I as a single woman, I get asked not in my current congregation. I'll name my current congregation lifts up every aspect of me being a woman. But in previous spaces past, I have been at, like, don't talk about your dating life. Not that I was going to anyways, but it was a big, like, don't. And I was like, oh, like, I wasn't going to, but okay, I understand that, like, the embodiment of single women and what we may or may not do with our bodies is a threat to the church.
Well,
and somebody said to me when I first came here, and my predecessor, my friend Bob Hill said, Bob Hill, they said, someone said, oh, you're the new Bob Hill. You don't look like Bob Hill. And somewhere the Holy Spirit showed up and just kind of right out of my mouth. And I said, yeah, they don't make a Cole Haan pump in Bob's size.
Yeah, amen.
And it was just about that, I mean, yeah, I don't know. And that wasn't anything against Bob. It wasn't anything against anybody, it was just that, no, he doesn't wear a Cole Haan stiletto. I feel certain. So.
Well, you haven't seen him at Bethany retreats as I have, so yeah. I'm just kidding. Bob Hill does not wear stilettos.
But I mean, that's the handoff of legacy as well, right? And if we're going back to that, like, what does that mean? Like, you are now in this legacy of community, right? You're and yet you take some things. Bob is a beloved of yours. Like, there are something, and yet that baton has been handed off, and you're expected now to run. You don't stick that baton with the person that gave it to you. You're expected to hold it. You share that connection of holding and passing it on, and then you are expected to run to the next person waiting for that baton, because there is someone waiting for that baton.
Right.
So, Spirit, who are your? Where do you see them in the Bible?
So I want, it's my birthday and it's my ordination anniversary.
Oh, happy birthday!
Thank you. And I went and read the text this morning that I used for my ordination, as I am wont to do this day every year. I also read my ethics notes, and it's a recommitment to who God has called me to be in this time. And one of my the stories that we read at my ordination was Thecla, and I love her so much. Always have, and she
only at First Church.
I wrote down Thecla on a note card, and it is on my desk at home because I was going to hold it up to my head when you said it, because
you called it. You called it. Because Thecla goes in, and she's in the legacy of Paul, and she's hearing and she's doing things, and even her beloved Paul is like, not you, her mom's like, just get married. And she's like, no, I'm going to preach the gospel. And they try and murder her, and she baptizes herself, which I think is the most badass thing to do, to say, like, I've got this I've got my own body and my own faith and my own relationship with God in my hands, guiding me through. And I think that is embodied. I think we saw that embodied really well in Pino last year, in her confidence, in her naming her spiritual gifts and physical gifts and all that went into it, and really just showing up authentically. So Pino's my Thecla. I did say that the 2019 as a whole, that team showed up as John the Baptist, just kind of like wild and called. Like they like there is something to the like him showing up in like, you know, the hair and all the honey and all the craziness that was John the Baptist coming onto the scene. And I think we kind of got that last year with these women. We expected kind of the 2015 team, which was a good team and solid, and they played sports and they stayed in their lane. And then all of a sudden we have mega stars coming out of this and that have crossed platforms that are using right now. I want to shout out 5 of our women, I think, are doing the Share the Mic Now campaign. It's a hashtag Share the Mic. They've given over their platforms. I know Alex, Pino, Ashlyn, Allie, I don't know if Becky, someone else is, there's 5 of them, I thought. And so they're sharing the mic now. They've been in conversation. But all of them, every last one of those girls on that team are known. They are, you know, you got Crystal Dunn coming out, just like just a baller, doing everything that she, and like, and Jessica McDonald being named in lots of different spaces as like kind of one of the older players with a kid. She had an older kid in that space. Every one of them just showed up like out of the wilderness, like faithful and called, and like showed up to that mission of winning and speaking for justice and equity and equal pay and fabulous women and queer people and Black people and all of it, and just doing the work that God ordained them to do. So,
and unapologetically.
And unapologetic. I mean, the scriptures don't tell us like, and then John the Baptist like fucking took a shower and like put on a suit and got in his Sunday best and baptized Jesus. It was like, no, like let's do this thing, right? And that's how these women showed up as themselves.
I mean, you raised that stupid theological point about untying Jesus' thong of his sandals, but
I mean, but hey, girl. So, you know, show up as yourself, and I think that that's what these women did last year, and continue to do it in brave and faithful ways that continue the legacy of strong women in this world. So Stuart,
I'm gonna answer the question.
Yeah, please.
Because I'm vacillating between 2. So I'm gonna do the one that I was thinking before this conversation started, and now the one I'm actually more okay with.
Okay.
One coming into this was the idea of the mighty men in the David narratives, the army that David has, because the mighty men, according to tradition, are descended from the Nephilim. That is, they have the angels intermixing with humanity. So like the mighty men are huge. Like they're like these forces of nature, and they're the ones who really make the kingdom happen. And we don't know anything except like a list of names, but they keep showing up in the story, and they keep showing up, and their part becomes bigger and bigger. But I don't like it. So instead, I'm going to say Shiphrah and Puah in Exodus chapter 1, my 2 favorite midwives of all time, because I just keep thinking about Megan Rapinoe going, we're not going to the effing White House. Like just so matter-of-factly, and it's just like these midwives who were tasked with killing all of the boys, because the girls, they didn't even need to worry about killing, right? And the midwives just go to Pharaoh, they're like, it's the damnedest thing. These Hebrew women, they'd pop out kids and they've like run them out into the woods by the time we get there.
And then they're playing in the Olympics.
Yeah. And then it's like, they're like, oh, oops. Wow, I can't believe we did that, Pharaoh. And Pharaoh's like, but I'm I'm Yul Brynner. And they're like, yeah, I guess we're just bad at our jobs. And there's the subversion that is necessary and good and holy. And I like anything that subverts the hegemony. Amen. So this has been 2 on 1 with the birthday woman, the Reverend Stephanie Kendall, better and more often known as Spiff. Happy 37th. I think I've said it 37 times in our vidcast today. Our guest today has been the Reverend Shanna Steitz. Thank you so much, so much. It is so good to make your acquaintance and your a face-to-face conversation. Next week, we are doing the character arc of Tony Stark in the MCU, which I think every time we say it, we need to say it in that rhythm. The da 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 da. And will you please announce our guests for specific?
Yes, so we are going from Iron Man 1 through Endgame with the Reverend Kara Gilger. So,
One of the, like 4 people on this planet who just terrifies me in the best possible way. She just intimidates me, and I hope she sees that, and I'll tell her that to her.
And then the week after that, we are doing my favorite comedy of all time, Wet Hot American Summer, with the Reverend Whitney Waller-Cole. But here's the invitation.
I'm glad you're raising the intellect to follow me on.
No.
Those are some really smart, really talented humans. I'm glad you're raising your game.
Stop it.
You are one too.
But the invitation is out there for all of you who are watching or maybe watching or come across this in some way. If you are a faith leader and you have some sort of thought on some pop culture topic, it's really open. Hit us up, 2on1project@gmail, or follow us on Instagram. Or
you may think it's obscure, and it may be, but we will do our absolute best.
I just need to clarify that one of our associates here at Community, one of my staff colleagues, needed me to understand. I said, they always make fun of me because I don't really know much about pop culture. It's not really my thing. And I said, you have to stop doing this. I'm now on a podcast about pop culture. He said, let's be clear. Sports culture is not pop culture. He said, you understand sports culture. You don't really understand. So anyway, just a joke to, that.
Megan Rapinoe is pop culture.
Yeah, please tell that staff colleague of yours that he's wrong.
You will love to hear he is wrong in this context.
That's right.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you. Skip, we'll have a gin and tonic in your honor tonight.
I love it. Call me up.
For your birthday, because I think we have spent a couple of your birthdays having gin and tonics on our back patio over the years.
Yeah, and hopefully we'll do so again once we can gather.
Someday.
And I'll be sending you a video of me wearing a sports bra, waving a shirt over my head in just about a minute. Gotta wait for my office manager to go. She said she won't film me. So, all right. Thank you very, very much. I'm going to stop our recording right now.